Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me as always is my co-host, Austin Davidson.
Yo.
It is Season 6, Episode 1. We've begun a new season here on the podcast, and we are going to be talking about prospects for the first time this offseason, looking forward to the 2021 NFL Draft. We started first with the tight end position, as we outlined at the end of our last episode, and the tight end position is one that's going to carry some importance going into the offseason. The Steelers have not used a day 1 or 2 pick on a tight end since 2007, which was Mike Tomlin's first draft. So there's a lot to look forward to with these prospects. And with only Eric Ebron and Kevin Rader as far as players with NFL experience on the roster, there's a lot of potential to add a player, whether it be through free agency or the draft. So Austin and I currently have 6 different players that we took an in-depth look at. But before we get into that, let's get into some Steelers news, Austin. The biggest news regarding the Steelers is the fact that Ben Roethlisberger is officially coming back. It was announced by Chairman Art Rooney II that the Steelers would be interested in bringing back Roethlisberger in 2021, but as stated before, there would need to be some work done to lower his $41.25 million cap hit, making an extension most likely. This would need to be done by March 17th, which is in a couple weeks here, which is the start of the new league year where a $14 million roster bonus comes due. So expect something due by then. What do you think about all of that?
It was an interesting choice. There was a lot of nonsense that came out about this whole situation, that there was going to be a standstill, that there was a standoff between Ben Roethlisberger's team and the rest of the Steelers front office, but I think it's all good now, and I mean, I was kind of about just moving on, just kind of taking a year and seeing what you have in Mason Rudolph, and ideally you instead of sitting in the limbo the Steelers have been, just kind of have a bad year and come back next year when you're likely to have, fingers crossed, 3 third-round comp picks. But I mean, with Ben Roethlisberger back, I feel like the team is just going to go 9-7 and probably lose first round in the playoffs. But I guess it is what it is. I don't really have much else to say about that.
I personally don't like making change for the sake of making change. I'm not a big believer in just rolling with a bridge quarterback. I think Mason Rudolph is on his way out after this season, most likely, regardless of what happens, if he's the starter next season or not anyways, if Ben Roethlisberger would not have returned, just because the way players like that get paid, the Steelers would have had to keep him on the franchise tag, and I don't think that the Steelers would have been too willing to do that. So I think it makes the most sense bringing him back at a reduced rate. I understand the logic in just trying to field a playoff competitive team and then trying to get there, because who knows what can happen when you make the playoffs, and I understand that. You can disagree with that if you want, and I'll listen to that kind of argument, because it's quite clear that the Steelers team in 2020 is most likely going to be better than the team they field this upcoming year, and the quarterback will be a year older, so I understand all of that. But, we'll see. You run it back next year, and I don't think, regardless of him coming back, that should or would stop the Steelers from taking a quarterback that they really like if there's one available in the first round.
Yeah, for sure. Quarterback, the Steelers love addressing a position in free agency as a security blanket and then going to grab that same position early in the draft. We saw this quite a few times, like with Terrell Edmonds and why am I forgetting his name? The guy that was on the Browns and got cut.
Morgan Burnett.
Dunked on. Yes, Morgan Burnett. They got Morgan Burnett in free agency. Then they drafted Terrell Edmonds. They got Evan Bush after trying it with Mark Barron. It's something that they do often, and it's just something to do. They like to cover their bases just in case.
And, yeah, because in some cases it doesn't work out, like the year before Mark Barron when they brought in John Bostic.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I don't know if you're saying that's what Dwayne Haskins is, but he was brought in at least to be depth this year, and then beyond that, who knows. But, yeah, I mean, we can talk about the Steelers taking a quarterback pretty much all offseason, but I think you and I would agree that if it's not the first pick, it's probably not likely, because if you do take a quarterback in the draft, you almost have to ensure them making the roster.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that it has to make sense, and I feel like if you're not taking a top-tier quarterback in the first round, it's probably not going to make sense, especially not when you just you have Dwayne Haskins and Mason Rudolph sitting, so it doesn't really matter. If you don't like a quarterback this year, as well just wait till next year and not waste a second or third round pick on a guy that's like, yeah, maybe.
So, as far as Roethlisberger goes, there's some charting information that's come across the general public. He attempted 573 of his 608 passes out of the shotgun last year, which Michael Lombardi of The Athletic discovered, which he also pointed out eliminates true play action, which involves turning the back to the defense and involves that run action, which forces linebackers to come up into the fold, opening up space for potential deeper passes down the field, which I think is a good point made, is that so many passes from the shotgun took away from the Steelers' potential to make plays down the field because they couldn't execute as much play action. The Steelers had one of the lowest play action percentages in the entire league, and in a league where play action is becoming a really powerful weapon, and the stats show that you don't even need a great running game to do so, the Steelers haven't done much of it. I just think it's another example that the Steelers' offense should change in 2021. Whether or not it does, we'll see, but I think I'm thinking we will see more pistol, and hopefully with more of it will come more play action and therefore more chunk plays.
Sure hope so, because it's so high, and it's part of the predictability of the offense. I feel like if you know that a quarterback is going to be operating a shotgun 90% of the time, you're going to be very prepared for it. And the few times that you come out, it's like you're probably also going to be prepared for that too, because it happens so little that there's so much. You watch the tape and you see the few times that it's used. I don't know. I just hope they change it up at least a little bit. I know that you were an advocate for a 75 to 25% split at the least, and I would be that.
I'd like to see even more, honestly, but I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know if they're I guess shotgun and pistol are different, so I'm assuming that they're not including that in those numbers. But I would like to see that, and frankly, if they're not going to do that, then I would not have been in favor. For me, I'm okay with Ben coming back if they're going to do more of that. Because if not, then it is the whole insanity doing the same thing over and over again. And then if they are willing to do pistol, then I'd be more okay with it. I'm just operating under the assumption that they will at least use more of it. So that's why I'm a little more in favor of it. But, I mean, I guess time will tell.
We'll have to see.
I believe that was it as far as Steelers news was concerned. Was there anything else that we missed?
That I know of.
Okay. So as we get into the tight end position here, let's talk about the guys on the roster. There's three different guys on exclusive rights free agent tags right now, and Kevin Rader, Charles Jones, and Dax Raymond. Rader's the only guy that played legitimate snaps last year, as I recall. For the Steelers anyways. So he's mostly a blocker, pretty limited. I remember being upset when he made the practice squad because I didn't even think he was good enough to make that team a couple years ago. But besides that, you have Zach Gentry, the former fifth-round pick, coming back from, I believe, an Achilles injury. He's got 2 years left, the only tight end under contract beyond this season. And Eric Ebron, who's set to be the starter again. Kind of a top-heavy room, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just Eric Ebron, and I don't feel like the Steelers have a definitive blocker going into next season. Like, none of their tight ends are particularly good at it. Gentry's coming off an injury, and even then, he didn't look particularly great at it. Kevin Raiders was maybe decent, but who knows if he'll even last. It's like he's not a guy that's guaranteed a roster spot. So the Steelers based on the look of it, need a tight end. At least, if not for this year, they need one for going forward.
Yeah, because Ebron I wouldn't expect to return following this upcoming season because even though he was pretty much as advertised last year, he's starting to get to a point where he might be slowing down within the next couple seasons. So I would think that making the tight end position could be one where we see the Steelers double dip both in free agency and the draft.
All these guys are replaceable. Gentry could get cut too. If you decide that you want to draft a tight end and you also pick one in free agency, you could see Zach Gentry gone. Kevin Rader could also be gone. They could add to this group.
Yeah, right now Ebron's the only guy short of a roster spot, and it's basically just this upcoming season. That's it. So, part of that's also going to be because of the retirement of Vance Mcdonnell. So, keep in mind he's carrying a dead cap number of just under $3 million, as we reported on his retirement earlier in the offseason. Overall need at the position, I saw free agency as a medium need just because you'd mostly, again, be adding some sort of Band-Aid. I'm sure you could find someone for near the minimum, maybe Jesse James. We've talked about several different times on this podcast. I'd be really in favor of bringing him back. And then if you do that, you can get away with maybe a mid-round draft pick, someone that could be a future number 2 in years to come.
I think that's fair, too, because Jesse James, I feel like, would be an immediate improvement over Zach Gentry. I feel like you would need to keep Kevin Rader at that point because I still think Kevin Rader is the better blocker of the three between Ebron, Jesse James, and Rader. I think Gentry is very expendable, and bringing Jesse James back for the veteran minimum would be pretty good for the passing game.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as the draft goes, we already talked about it. It's a pretty high need, and obviously if the right pick is available, I wouldn't rule out tight end at 24. I think it's less likely than other positions, but I wouldn't rule it out. And I certainly think day 2 is a good possibility, maybe the highest possibility for tight end.
It would be, like you said, to open the podcast, be the first time since 2007 a tight end has been taken for round 4, if it does happen.
Certainly long overdue. So why don't we start with a guy who, as far as the prospects go, a guy that has been discussed as not just one of the best tight end prospects we've seen, but also one of the best prospects in general in this draft, a guy that has been compared to even the likes of a guy like Calvin Johnson, even though he's a tight end. What can you tell me about Kyle Pitts regarding his hype? Is he as great as the experts are saying? What did you see when you were watching this potentially generational player?
He was really good. Obviously, Kyle Pitts is from Florida. He's a junior. He's 6'6", and what I found was 239 pounds. But without the combine, this has been a whole pain in the ass trying to find what their official measurements are. But for right now, until Florida has their pro day, I have him as 239 pounds. He's actually a Pennsylvania, not the wrong side of Pennsylvania, but he was born in Philadelphia and he attended high school out in Pennsylvania. But he was a 4-star recruit coming out, playing both defensive end and tight end before committing to Florida for their 2018 season as a tight end. In his season, Pitts caught 3 passes for 73 yards and a touchdown. Then going into 2019, Pitts was able to secure the starting job and broke out, making 54 catches for 639 yards and 5 touchdowns. In 2020, he became a touchdown machine, recording 12 touchdowns on the year while also having 43 catches for 770 yards. What's scary is he would have had more. He just suffered a concussion. So he was on track for a monster season if the 770 yards was not enough. After his junior season, Pitts decided to declare for the draft. And I had this split up positives and negatives. So I want to start with his positives. Pitts is essentially a wide receiver playing tight end. He runs the entire route tree and lines up at multiple spots. H-back, as a wide receiver, in line, you name it. He makes him a very versatile option for any team. In terms of his route running, I felt like he succeeded most on slants and mesh routes, but he showed excellent capabilities on seam routes and posts as well. In fact, as John showed me right before this podcast, PFF has him graded as like the highest in the middle of the field all the way down. There's only 4 incompletions when thrown to him in the middle of the field on any level altogether. So overall, he's really good in the middle of the field. And the above-average speed, agility, but definitely helps and really contributes to my personal favorite route he runs. I call a reversal route. I don't actually know what other people call it. I was trying to discuss this with someone at work today, actually. It's basically it's like a drag route, or you start to do a drag route, and then you dig your foot in and you spin and you go the complete opposite way. I call that a reversal route. I don't know what it's officially actually called. I literally tried to look it up. I don't know why I couldn't find anything on it. I guess because it's probably not really an official route, but he ran it. He ran it a couple times. Essentially, I just explained it. It just destroys defenders with because they never expect a guy his size to have the footwork and agility to do so, to put his foot in the ground and just spin around and completely change direction and be that fast at changing direction. Easily his best route, and it was nasty to watch. Next, he is shown to be a matchup nightmare for linebackers at the college level. I expect that to continue at the NFL level, especially if he stays at the tight end position. Often he demanded extra attention, or the attention of one of the best players on the team, like in the South Carolina game where he was lined up against J.C. Horn, which, if you guys don't know J.C. Horn, he's a projected first-round cornerback, and he's the son of former Saints wide receiver Joe Horn. And he was on Pitts for most of the game. And in the Alabama game, there's a guy that was in my mock draft for the Steelers as a first-round pick. It was Patrick Surtain. Had lined up on him for a bunch of that game. He was even triple-teamed a few times. That's how dangerous teams consider him. He needs to be watched out for. Going to catching, Pitts wasn't credited with the drop at all in 2020. He has long arms with very strong hands that allow him to extend and grab the ball, even when draped in coverage. There were quite a few highlights of him making combative catches and winning because of the combination of his height, length, catchability, and then the jumping. He has some hops if the length wasn't enough. Then to go with it, he showed great tracking, making a few back shoulder catches as well. As a blocker, Pitts is willing and really excelled on double team blocks. He did hold his own on times in one-on-one blocks as well, though. Not all the time, but he definitely has at least some ability to work with there. He also shown to be a solid blocker on wide receiver screens. There was this one specific play against Kentucky where he blocked one guy, held on long enough for his offensive tackle to come and help block, and then he moved on to the next level to get the next guy and opened up a big hole for the screenplay. It was nice. Like I said, there's definitely something to work with him blocking. He also expectedly dominated cornerbacks every time he was tasked with blocking them. It's just a complete size mismatch, and there's never going to be a cornerback that is going to be able to break his block without great hand combat. The last thing I'll say is that there's room on his frame to grow bigger and get stronger, which he will likely have to do at least a little once he gets to the NFL. Sitting at 239 pounds, he could probably deal with another 10 pounds, and probably way more than that, but 10 pounds would help him a lot, and he has a frame to add on. So going to his negatives, I feel like awareness is one of the biggest drawbacks, and it relates to a bunch of things. For example, Pitts definitely needs to be more aware of where he is on the field. There were a handful of plays where he had space and accidentally ran out of bounds a little too early, or he just needed a toe tap, and he just couldn't get his foot down when he had the space. That has me concerned, since at the NFL level he's going to have to get 2 feet down. There was 2 touchdowns I got called out of bounds at the college level that I watched. He just didn't know where he was on the field, and that concerns me a little bit, again, because you have to get 2 feet down at the NFL level, and he just had to get 1, and there was space. That was the problem. There was space there. It wasn't like he was just draped on both those touchdowns. But continuing on with awareness, I feel like he looked lost at times as a blocker, not being able to find where pressure was coming from. It wasn't always, but it came up a few times on tape. Speaking of his blocking, it was very hit or miss. There was only 1 sack I credited to him out of the games I watched, and it came against Alabama. But as you'd expect from a guy like Pitts, he's not the type to be blocking very often on passing downs. So a high percentage of if he has to block more, I expect obviously more sacks to happen. So it is something that concerns me. On pull and motion blocks especially, he was very ineffective. They only came up a few times, but none of them worked with him, as he struggled to take the right angle to his block and often let them get around him. Part of the blocking being hit or miss is also because he's a little undersized for a tight end, because he's sitting at 239 pounds. I know I kind of already mentioned that. He would likely do better if he put on 10 to 15 more pounds, especially for a guy's height. For comparison, Noah Fant is 6'4" and came out at 249 pounds, and that's 2 inches shorter than he is right now. We'll see at Pitt's Pro Day his official weight, though. He could have possibly already put on more weight, so it might not be a negative. The weight could help with getting pushed off his route sometimes, too. It wasn't a very big problem, as I saw it only a few times, but some corners really disrupted his routes. And with bigger, stronger competition at the NFL level, I would expect this to increase when he gets there. Lastly, while Pitts is a very good route runner, I believe there's room for improvement on his in and out routes where he doesn't have very sharp cuts. If you get a sharper break on those routes, his route tree would quite literally be perfect. And it's very nitpicky because they're still solid routes, and for a tight end to be running like that, still really good. So going to overall, Kyle Pitts is easy comparison to Darren Waller. Waller came out of college at 6'6" and 238 pounds as a wide receiver, which is identical to Pitts' 6'6", 239 pounds. And while not very strong, he was always fast. Waller has since put on weight coming out and is now at 255 to fit the tight end role better at the NFL level, but he never played tight end at college. He became a tight end at the NFL level. But I expect Pitts to do the same, maybe not to the same extent, but I think Pitts is going to go at least up 10 pounds. That being said, with how everyone was rating Pitts, I figured he'd be more NFL ready. Daniel Jeremiah listed him as the third best prospect in this entire draft, and I felt like that doesn't fit. I haven't seen the rest of the prospects, but it feels like that can't be right. Otherwise, this is, no offense to Pitts, this is a very sad draft class. It pains me to say this because I was a big Pitts super fan coming in. I saw him play when I watched Freddie Swain last year. I said, wow, this guy's going to be great. And, I mean, he broke out in 2020, had an even better year. So I was right in that regard, but I do think Pitts is being a little overrated here. To be the third best prospect of any position as a tight end, he needed to be a complete blocker at the college level, and he's just not there yet, in my opinion. And the weight thing is going to hold him back if he doesn't bulk up. I do really like him, though, still, just because I believe his value is a little overrated right now. Doesn't mean he's not a very good player. I think he's still a first rounder, but I believe he'll be picked outside the top 15. Too many teams with other needs to take a tight end so early make it hard for him. But with his abilities, he's definitely a first rounder. If you look at him as a wide receiver, if a team, I'm not going to say that he's guaranteed outside the top 15. If a team looks at him and says, I want this guy to be a wide receiver, he might be better than the best wide receivers in this class. He might be better than Jamar Chase and Devontae Smith. I have not watched their tape, so I can't say that either for sure, but that versatility might also bump him up. I do think that a team is going to stick with him at tight end, though, and that to me is probably not the move. I think that he's actually better suited to be a big wide receiver. But that being said, my guess is he falls just outside the top 15. I say he goes in the late teens to the early 20s is when he comes off the board. For the tape I watched for him, I watched his 2019 highlights, his 2020 highlights. I watched him versus Ole Miss in 2020, versus Kentucky in 2020, versus Alabama in 2020, versus South Carolina in 2020, and versus Texas A&M in 2020. I think it's the most tape I've watched on a prospect ever, because he had so much, because he is so highly valued. I know you got three great prospects here in Hunter Long, in Noah Gray, and Pat Freiermuth. Which one would you like to start with?
I'm going to start with Hunter Long, but first I got a quick question for you. Do you think you could project Pitts for me? Could you project his NFL career as a receiver, and then could you project his career as a true tight end?
Projected in what way? Like how long it will last? Like how we will do?
I guess like what kind of player he'll be, how high is his ceiling comparatively, and do you think he could have a better career as a receiver, as a true tight end, basically? Basically just trying to see what might benefit him more in your eyes, whether it's being a true receiver or a tight end.
The long run, I think it's tight end. For him to get started immediately, though, I think he could get started immediately as a wide receiver in the NFL. I feel like tight end, he needs... It's not that he has to wait. He's because it's like Eric Ebron's going to be tight end one, and obviously his blocking. Honestly, Eric Ebron's blocking is probably worse than Kyle Pitts. It's not like Pitts' blocking is even that bad. It's just that he's not going to be elite. He's not elite at blocking. He's not one of the greatest blockers there is. To me, that's going to restrict him early on. As a wide receiver, though, I don't think his blocking's tight end NFL ready. If you look at him as a wide receiver, though, his blocking is NFL ready, because how often is a wide receiver going to be blocking at any corner? I will say this with confidence that there is not a cornerback in the NFL that will be able to handle a Kyle Pitts block without great hand fighting skills. It's literally it's a size mismatch for any corner. And that being said, also he's just a size mismatch for most corners. There's not that many big tall corners that can stop him. I think that's why it makes him better for wide receiver early on. Tight end, it's mostly about the blocking. Like, he's going to be a mismatch at tight end as well. I mean, going up against linebackers is nutty. I think that he should be able to beat NFL linebackers too, because they don't have the speed to keep up with them. I just think that he's going to be able to get going faster as a wide receiver. His career will have a quicker start. Whereas if he develops as a tight end, I think that that'll be better for him in the long run. It just depends on if a team wants to get him going immediately or not. I'm sure that he's going to be playing a lot immediately for whatever team takes him regardless. But I personally think that wide receiver would get him going first, and tight end would be better in the long run.
But bottom line, you think this is a potential blue chip long-term type of impact player down the line?
Oh, yeah. I think that with his skill set, he's going to be an impact player regardless of what position that a team wants him for. I think that he's going to make an impact. I just think that as a wide receiver, it fits him more since his blocking isn't there yet, and he has all the elite, basically other than speed, he has all the elite abilities that a wide receiver does.
I understand. All right, I changed my mind. I'm going to go with Pat Freiermuth of Penn State. Only played in a handful of games this past year, but is still one of the higher-ranked tight end prospects going into this year. He was a former All-Massachusetts selection in high school. Fun fact, all three of my tight ends were All-Massachusetts players in high school, so that's kind of interesting. But he also made All-State as a linebacker while being named a team captain in high school. A 4-year basketball veteran as well. The 6'5", 258-pound Freiermuth was a freshman All-American player and an honorable mention All-Big Ten while playing in 13 games as a freshman and scored 8 touchdowns on 26 receptions, made second-team All-Big Ten, and was named the team MVP as well as a captain in his sophomore season with a career-high 43 receptions for 507 yards and 7 touchdowns. And last year was a preseason All-American and All-Big Ten, was a team captain, and despite the fact that he only played in 4 games, he had 23 receptions for 310 yards and 1 touchdown. So he was on pace for bigger and better things as far as a receiver goes. Overall, in 30 games, he caught 92 passes for just under 1,200 yards and scored 16 touchdowns, which broke Mike Gesicki's record at Penn State of 15. He also had 1 catch in 29 straight games, which was an interesting stat going all the way back to a game against Pittsburgh in 2017. That's right. Nope, 2018. My bad. I am bad at math. He's a junior, not a senior. So as far as the way I kind of outlined my prospects, I did things a little differently. For tight ends, I looked at 10 different categories, and after looking through my tape of each player, I tried to give snippets on each attribute and my thoughts on whether or not they performed well or average or bad on these traits. So I'm starting with hands for Pat Freiermuth. As far as his hands go, they're big and powerful, just like the rest of his body. Freiermuth has the ability to make all types of grabs that a top NFL level tight end should make, which is good. He's got those big, strong hands. But he also had an issue with drops. He had 8 in his college career, which is concerning considering he didn't have a ton of targets. But on the plus side, 5 of those came in his freshman season, so he only had 3 in the last year and really year and a half of his play there, rounding out his college career. So it finished better than it started for him, and for that I gave him a B- in that area. As far as his ability as a route runner and his overall route tree, his route tree was pretty diverse at Penn State. He was able to use his athleticism to the best of his ability. He ran a lot of routes in the middle of the field and short and intermediate routes on the boundaries. Wasn't a big vertical threat as far as going deep down the field. He's not that kind of tight end, so he was a bit limited there. And as an actual route runner, he's not super crisp, but he does his job well enough as a route runner. I gave him a B- in this area. Considering how much time he missed, I think it's understandable and forgivable for him. Freiermuth's release is not really nuanced, his release off the line of scrimmage. He didn't face a ton of press coverage in college, which is common when you're in the slot, and he's going to see that more in the NFL. The good news is that he's so strong he can fight through traffic with good efficiency to make up for the fact that he doesn't really have a good plan right now. I think he'll continue to improve in this area, but he did a good enough job in college. I gave him a B there. As far as his contested catchability goes, they call him Baby Gronk for a reason, and it never seemed more apparent than it did on tape here. Difficult catches in traffic with linebackers and defensive backs bearing down on him, trying to break it up with either hard hits or trying to fight with him while he tries to grab the ball. His ability to win battles here was very impressive, and it's going to make him a problem in the NFL. This is something that I can see easily translating at the NFL level. I gave him an A-. His run after the catch ability, similarly to his idol Rob Gronkowski, Freiermuth's greatest asset is his ability to just run over people and plow through people in the open field with his sheer strength and power. He will be a bull in the open field. He is not going to be fun for smaller defenders to try to tackle and bring down. He also showed a little bit of wiggle and a good change of direction for a big guy at times. That doesn't mean he's an elusive guy. There's tight ends that do a much better job of breaking tackles with their elusiveness and overall athleticism and agility than Freiermuth, but he was okay in that regard. I wonder if he'll get better in this area. He might not, but the physicality and power is good enough for him right now. I gave him a B as well. Functional athleticism, this is an area where it's a plus for him, but it's obviously nowhere close to a guy like Kyle Pitts. He has enough athleticism to make moves, get separation, but he's not so athletic that faster linebackers won't be able to keep up with him. If NFL teams are going to focus their coverages on him, he's going to have a lot of times where he's going to be making catches in contested situations. So at this point, when you're talking about this being his biggest issue, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But I gave him a B+ for that just because he is a good athlete, but compared to guys like Kyle Pitts, it's not as good. But Kyle Pitts is also in a unique area on his own, so I think that's fair to not ding him too hard for that. His in-space blocking, like on the move, I thought he was solid as a rock. He needs to clean up his footwork and balance like most young tight ends need to, but he can function on the move. I don't imagine he'll be used as a lead blocker that often, though, but he does have the speed to get out on the edge for screens, so it could be something that's in his future. On a receiver screen in the 2019 Cotton Bowl against Memphis, he absolutely threw someone off the screen. That was pretty impressive on a touchdown, so anyone that's seen that play or knows what I'm talking about, it's pretty nice to see. I gave him a B+ there. His inline blocking was pretty good to see, too. There's some tools here. He's got a nasty attitude that the other tight ends I saw did not have. Any team would love to have that. He didn't really progress the way that I thought he might from year to year, and the same way that others probably were. With so much importance placed on the passing game, it might take him some time to fully develop here, but the strength and willingness is there. I think he could be a really good blocker. Some people aren't as high on his blocking as I am, but I think he could be a really good one sometime. But for now, he's at least functional, so I gave him a B+ here. And his physicality, which I've already touched on a bit, I think it's an A+ level physicality. He plays like Rob Gronkowski, his idol, and he's a matchup nightmare for defensive backs and linebackers alike. He will enjoy that advantage in the NFL with targeting matchups and his ability to overwhelm smaller players on blocks. And he's clearly stronger than he was when he walked in on day one, and he's just going to keep getting stronger. So I think his physicality is an A+. My last thing to look at here is versatility. He's versatile, but he's also not the most versatile player. He's not going to be Heath Miller in terms of his all-around ability, a great receiver and a great all-around blocker. I don't think he'll be the same blocker, but he's not going to be a liability in the running game, even as he is currently. And then when you factor in his ability as a receiver, well, he'll be really good in the middle of the field, but won't be dynamic down the field. I still think you've got a pretty solid, versatile player, even if he's not the most versatile and excellent in terms of his versatility. So I gave him a B here. Overall, Freiermuth has one big concern, and that's his injury history. He had a season-ending shoulder injury in 2020 that caused him to miss most of that season. He only played in 4 games. I think that if he had played a full season last year, he could be potentially the clear-cut number 2 tight end. In fact, he might be already, but he might be talked at as a for-sure first-round pick. He's not going to stretch the field like Kyle Pitts will, but he's going to be a menace over the middle for a while. I thought at first the Baby Gronk moniker was just kind of convenient for people because he wore 87 at first, but the more I watched his tape, the more it became clear pretty quickly that this is a good player that has potential at the NFL level. And even with his injury concerns, even if he's not quite the same player athletically that Gronk was in his prime, we just saw what Gronk past his prime looks like, and it's still pretty good. So I think that there's hope that Pat Freiermuth could be a pretty good player in the NFL. I don't think there's any reason he can't be a productive player for a long time, barring injuries, of course. I think that'll keep him from being a day 1 prospect, but I might consider trading down later in round 1 for this guy. I think he's a future staple in an NFL offense for years to come, certainly in heavy personnel. I saw highlights, games against Ohio State and Memphis in 2019, and I saw a game against Nebraska this past season. Do you have any questions for me regarding Pat?
No, I think you did it well. I think you broke him down pretty well.
Thank you. I enjoyed breaking things down a little bit differently this time. I noticed that I was missing kind of things as far as his injury history or if there were any concerns off the field, which I didn't see. But I wanted to get more in-depth with the actual nuances of the player's game, and I think that this helped me. I don't know if this is something you were planning on trying to do, but I know it helped me. So I just wanted to make sure I tried it, and I think I'm going to keep doing it this way. But yeah, Freiermuth was a good player. I didn't know that, like I said, I wasn't expecting the whole Baby Gronk thing to be something that really applies, but I actually think that it does. So as far as that goes, I actually do think it's a good comparison. You've got a couple more players to look at. Did you want to take a look at which one? Which guy do you want to look at now?
I'm going to do Bushman. Matt Bushman from BYU. Actually, before I get there, though, there's one more thing I want to say about Pitts. There's one more disappointing thing. This might sound stupid because of all the great plays he has. And I felt like Pitts didn't have a signature catch. I feel like every player, receiving player, has a signature catch, a one-handed grab, a mossing a guy. I watched so much tape of him in his highlights, and I just felt like I never got that signature. And it's such a stupid thing to bother me, but I wanted to mention that. But yeah, going to my next prospect, that's Matt Bushman from BYU, the senior. He's 6'5" and 240 pounds. Bushman came out of high school in Arizona, leading the nation in receiving yards as a tight end with over 1,500 yards. Obviously, this made him highly recruited, but BYU won him over. He had family that actually went to BYU before him and played football there. So he came on strong as a freshman, earning himself freshman All-American after starting 8 of 13 games, amassing 520 yards on 49 receptions, and then also having 3 touchdowns, leading the team in receiving. As a sophomore, he led the team in receiving yards again after starting another 8 games and catching 29 balls for 5 to 11 yards and 2 touchdowns. In 2019, he came on strong and led the team in receiving yet again with 47 receptions for 680 yards and 4 touchdowns through 11 starts. After a strong first 3 seasons, Bushman looked to solidify his draft status, playing with potential top 10 pick Zach Wilson in 2020, but unfortunately he suffered a torn Achilles in late August that kept him from playing his 2020 season. Despite being eligible for another season because of the injury, Bushman chose to declare for the draft anyway. So starting with the positives, Bushman had a surprising speed when he got to high gear for me. I'm not going to say he is wide receiver fast, but he has solid speed for a tight end. I wanted to point that out first. Getting to catching Bushman is one of the best pass-catching tight ends in this draft. Over his time at Brigham Young, he had been targeted 207 times and only has been credited with 2 drops. Strong hands and catch radius allows him to be able to haul in even some balls others would deem uncatchable. This is kind of a side note, but from what I saw from Zach Wilson, there were a lot of inaccurate throws. That kind of surprised me. Watching Wilson play, I thought he was really bad. So I'm very curious to see how he stepped forward into 2020, and it's a prospect I kind of want to look at now, because now I'm just kind of out there watching him play, and I'm like, wow, this guy makes really bad decisions. And oh my God, wow, this guy is really inaccurate. So I'm very curious on how he worked his way up to a top 5 pick, but it could have just been the games I watched. That's the end of the side note. Back to Bushman. He just makes plays. I saw some signature plays or catches that I felt like I missed with Pitts, where he had a one-handed catch in one game and another catch where he essentially mossed a guy, stuff like that. He had those signature plays. But now where I saw Bushman really thrive was zone coverage. Running zone against him was an awful choice, because he was a knack for finding the soft spot in zone to get big chunk plays. Now talking about his stature, he has the size of an NFL tight end and room to grow if he chooses once he gets to the NFL level. Finally, as a blocker, he was very willing and showed a lot of good things on tape, specifically in the Utah 2018 game where he was pushing back guys all field. There was one play where he was completely uninvolved, being on the left side of the field on a run down the middle, and he worked his way over the left side of the field to the middle of the field and made a great block on 2 guys in what should have been a touchdown if not for the running back being caught from behind. I was so mad watching that play. I was like, this man took out 2 people for you and you got caught from behind. It was excellent timing and everything, but yeah, no, he did really good in the Utah 2018 game I watched. So going with the negatives, I'm going to start with the obvious, and that's that he's coming off a major injury, which is always a concern going forward, because who knows if he can be the same player he was after rupturing his Achilles. It's always a gamble with stuff like that. It's been better for players now, and like the turn of the century, I feel like it's much more common for players to rehab and get back, but it is still something to be concerned with. It keeps me concerned because one of the downsides I saw to his game was inconsistent acceleration, where at times he would accelerate like a snail. It was so frustrating. He would be really, really slow. Like, once he gets to top speed, he was actually pretty fast, and that's why I put it in his positives. It's just, it takes him so long to get there. Like, on motion, motion is when he looked best, because when he was motioned and got like a head start, he kind of got to top speed there, but his acceleration is really, really bad. I don't really know how you fix that. I feel like that's a footwork thing. This would result in him getting draped in coverage, and I feel like the injury may only make that worse. Man coverage was able to shut him down pretty easily, that being said. Regardless of who was covering him, it's not just the running acceleration either. There were a few times where he was slow to get out of his stance when the ball was snapped, and it resulted in not as good a rep either, whether it was blocking or running his route, which might kind of sound like nitpicky, but I feel like that's a really bad thing. It could disrupt the entire timing of a play if he's not where he's supposed to be. Going back to the coverages used against him, something I'm concerned about is rather than him being great at finding the soft spot in his own, it's rather that he's just being schemed open a lot. To explain that, while I was watching his highlights, there are a few flea flicker plays that got him wide open that will not work at the NFL level. You're not going to see the flea flickers work more than once. And he had, I think it was 4. He had 4 in his highlight reel that they went after him specifically when they ran a flea flicker in BYU, which I found another interesting thing about BYU. Just watching their tape was a bunch of weird stuff, but like I said, that's not going to work at the NFL level, and maybe you see one of those plays a year regardless. Then similar to when I looked at Hayden Hurst, he is likely going to come into play as well. I don't know why. It was so hard to find his birthday. I don't know exactly when his birthday is still. Someone wrote that he is 24 and will be closer to 25 once the draft comes around. I just have to believe in that person. I don't know why. I tried looking everywhere to find out when he turns 25, but it's just sometime later in 2021. This could impact his ceiling as a player. They kind of say it's harder to grow when you're coming to the NFL older. It affects how high your ceiling could be sometimes. So I guess that's something to be worried about. Finishing with the blocking, he's another guy that needs to put on a little more weight once he's in the NFL. Another 8 to 10 pounds would do him wonders. Really, his blocking as a whole was inconsistent. if you could block like he did against Utah in 2018 every game, you would be golden, but you just don't see that. Like in the Washington game in 2019, shows a lot more there with letting guys get off his block and not putting enough like oomph into his initial punch because he's overall just got decent strength, not very impressive strength. So Bushman has some inconsistencies, and as an older player coming off injury, it'll be tough for him. I'm hoping for a big pro day for him. BYU's pro day is set for March 27th. Due to the nature of the and timing of his injury, he should be good to go there to at least participate in some things. They say that Achilles rupture is a 4 to 6 month recovery time, and since he suffered that all the way back in August, he should be basically more than fine. So he should be able to show off there. And I'm hoping for a good one for him. I root for all the players I look for, but he's definitely at least going to participate in some things. I think he declared last year would have been a third-round pick, maybe a late second, but I feel like he would have earned that late second if he played at the same level this year and improved at blocking going into the 2021 draft. However, after the injury, I view him as a late 4th to early 5th rounder. He has strong hands, and that should interest some teams. It's just taking a gamble with that injury and the age to see if you could develop into a pro blocker as well. And like I said, putting on the weight should help with the blocking, getting a little bit more strength as well. And in terms of what I saw from him, I saw his 2019 highlights. I watched first Washington in 2019, and then I watched first Utah in 2018. Obviously no 2020 tape because he did not play the 2020 season due to a ruptured Achilles. But it makes sense that he's coming out because he's just getting older. He would be going into the NFL at age 25 if he used his redshirt injury year. That was Matt Bushman. Which prospect would you like to go to next?
I'm going to go to Hunter Long next, the guy I was originally going to start with. A redshirt junior, 6'5", 253, a former second-team All-Massachusetts player and two-time All-Conference selection in high school. Had 30 receptions for 508 yards and 2 touchdowns with 7 sacks as a defensive lineman as a senior. Redshirted as a freshman, then as a redshirt freshman. Caught 4 passes for 103 yards and 2 scores in 12 games. Then was a third-team All-ACC honor as a sophomore with 28 catches, a team-high 509 yards and 2 scores. And then last year, caught 57 passes for 685 yards and 5 touchdowns, leading all tight ends in the nation with 85 targets. As I said, was an All-American. And overall in 36 games, caught 87 passes for 1,297 yards and 9 scores. So, starting with Long's hands, he has strong hands. I saw him secure a bunch of passes away from his body. He felt like a reliable option in the Boston College offense most of the time and was certainly looked at to make plays in the offense. Unfortunately, he dropped some passes with what I could only describe as just bad technique with his hands. He tried to body catch things when he should have just used his hands. More reps should help him clean this up. I also wanted to provide an update that I happened to see a game where he had 2 drops, and he had 3 drops in the entire season, so it kind of colored my image of him negatively. So his hands are pretty good, but I also got to see an instance where he had 1 bad game. And overall, he's done a good job with his hands, so I gave him a B+. His route tree and running ability, he ran a short and intermediate route tree, somewhat diverse, but not overly remarkable in my opinion. Obviously spent most of his time in the middle of the field. And when it came to running the routes, I thought that this was frankly nothing too impressive. He was not a crisp route runner, clunky and choppy when he was getting out there. No real nuance to his game in this area. No discernible skills that would set him apart in a positive manner. He did show that he could find soft spots in the zone when his quarterback had to extend the play, so I had to give him some credit there. I gave him a C+ in this area. As far as his release goes, I didn't think it was great. He uses some swim moves, and he's strong enough to get off the line, but he just feels a step slow. It really feels like he's charging, getting the steam going before he finally gets up to full speed. Dealing with stronger linebackers is going to be tough for him, I think. He'll still be able to get off decently with consistent quickness, and he also rarely chip blocks, so I don't know what that's going to look like when he has to do it, but he's good enough at it right now, so I gave him a B-. Long's contested catch ability was solid. He has the ability to make tough catches in traffic and will fight for jump balls, probably better than any of the other prospects I saw in terms of just straight up fighting. He made good grabs with defenders hanging on him, and that's pretty good. But when he is fighting for the ball, I noticed that he had trouble with his hand use. He deflected a pass in a desperation situation against Virginia Tech that resulted in an interception. I thought he had good sideline awareness and being able to get his feet down on some passes, even some passes that resulted in NFL catches where he had to tap it down. So I thought he did a good job there. His run after the catch ability there's not much. He has to be schemed open, and for his big plays, it mostly involved screen plays or plays where things were blocked for him where there was a lot of open field. He had maybe the play of his career against Virginia Tech, though. He caught a pass in traffic and then willed himself physically the final 8 yards over defenders into the end zone. So he's not useless out there, but it felt like an outlier than it was more the telling of the story with him. He usually just goes down and can't break away in the open field, so I gave him a C- for run after catch. His functional athleticism is not great either. It's good enough for a modern tight end, but I wouldn't go beyond that. He felt like a real tight end lining up on the outside, not a slot receiver that also plays tight end. He did make some nice plays on some deeper developing routes that required some speed, but compared to the tight ends you see today, he's definitely a step behind in functional athleticism, so I gave him a C+. Long's in-space blocking, I liked a lot of what I saw from him as a blocker on the move. Boston College used him in a lot of split zone concepts and even let him lead block on some zone read plays, which was pretty impressive to see. The team obviously trusted him, and he's got enough speed and acumen to get out there, which is good. He was also used as a blocker on receiver screens, and he got the job done there as well. His technique needs some work, but considering where he's at now, he's ahead of where a lot of tight ends are at this level, so I gave him a B+. And his inline blocking, I didn't think it was quite as good, but there is some good things to start with here. He's got a good push and nice extension in the arms. He showed he can make some blocks and combos and can get to the second level with a solid leg drive. But on the other hand, his technique still not great, just like it was on the move. He's too tall coming out, and he's getting eaten alive. He's going to get eaten alive by NFL defenders right away. I think he has the chance to become a good inline blocker in time, though. It'll just take a little while, and he needs to get stronger at the point of attack. So right now, I gave him a B- for inline blocking. His overall physicality, it's decent, but like I just said, I think he's lacking some play strength, and he could add some muscle to his frame, which will make him more attractive in this regard. His touchdown against Virginia Tech notwithstanding, as I mentioned to you, Austin, before, he feels more like Jesse James rather than Vance Mcdonnell in the open field. Long's versatility, about as versatile as they come. He was used all over the offensive formation. In line, the end of the line, deep slot, middle slot, outside, H-back. He's very functional in many different areas as a receiver, as a run blocker, and was even used to pass protect at times as well. How well is this going to translate to the NFL, given his limited athleticism? Time will tell, but he at least had a bunch of different things on his college tape that's something that bodes well for him. Overall, Hunter Long was one of the most productive tight ends in the country last season, and he has a lot of good traits that make him an attractive option in this year's draft. Versatility, dependability, and overall production were his strengths in college. Boston College counted on him to be an integral part of the offense, and there were a lot of positives, but at the same time, his lack of explosiveness and shiftiness, his functional athleticism, that's going to limit his upside, making him a high ceiling, low floor type. I messed that up. A high floor, low ceiling type of player. That's going to keep him from being a top tight end prospect like a Kyle Pitts or a Pat Freiermuth. I've seen Long listed as a late day 2 to mid day 3 prospect. When I first looked at his tape, and I still think this right now, I like him a little bit more than everyone else seems to. I think because of the way that he plays, there aren't many true do-it-all tight ends, even though I kind of said Pat Freiermuth is one of those guys. I think that if you're looking for a discounted version of an all-around tight end, you will find that in Hunter Long. Boston College is one of the few schools that still runs a typical pro-style offense, and I think that really benefited Hunter Long in this instance. And I gave him a B overall. I think you'll see him sometime in day 2, probably late day 2. I've seen him projected late 3rd round to the 5th round, and I'd frankly be okay with him in the 3rd round, but I could understand the 4th round as well. I saw his highlights, a game against North Carolina, Notre Dame, and at Virginia Tech. So that was Hunter Long. That was what I saw from his tape. And your last prospect being Kylene Granson from SMU. Can you tell me a little bit about him, how his tape stacks up to the other guys you looked at, and what is and is not impressive about him, please?
Sure. So he is a senior. He's 6'2", and he's 242 pounds coming out. Coming out of high school in Texas, Granson was only a 2-star recruit. He still received an offer, though, and thus Granson got his start at Rice, the same college where Boswell played and former Steelers tight end Vance Mcdonnell played. In spite of the fact he was only a 2-star recruit, he got a lot of playing time as a true freshman for Rice, catching 33 passes for 381 yards and 2 touchdowns. His sophomore year wasn't as good, only catching 18 passes for 241 yards and no touchdowns in a year where his team only won one of 12 games. This caused the head coach at the time that recruited him to get fired. Because of this, Granson decided to transfer to SMU. After a year off due to NCAA rules with transferring stuff, he came back strong in 2019, recording 43 catches for 721 yards and 9 touchdowns, the most touchdowns by a tight end in a season in SMU history through 13 games. As a senior, he played in 10 games and continued his success with 35 catches for 536 yards and 5 touchdowns, and earning himself all AAC first-team accolades for the first time ever. Following the 2020 season, he declared for the draft. Starting with the positives, Granson is definitely the best blocker I looked at. He was effective on every level with blocking, whether it be blocking on screens, bubble screens, in line, while lined up as a receiver, as a lead blocker, or while his quarterback was scrambling. He was doing it and doing it effectively. Where he really excelled was pull blocks, though. It appeared as though he could turn his speed into power on those, and it opened up quite a few holes that way. And he also had some solid blitz pickup. Yes, there were a few times where he didn't have a perfect block, but overall his blocking was good, especially for a guy his size. Going backwards for a moment, his play speed was insane. Complete opposite of Bushman, where he was at top speed in what felt like no time, and he is really fast for a tight end. I think he could have possibly kept up with Pitts in the 40-yard dash. I'm not sure it would have been faster, but their times would have been close based on the eye test. This makes him very dangerous once he gets the ball in his hands, combining his speed with his above-average athleticism for a tight end, and he becomes very hard to tackle. A play that comes to mind is his touchdown against Memphis back in the 2019 season, where he caught the ball over in the flat, stiff-armed one guy, quickly sped up, and then barreled into another to get into the end zone. The burst he has after that just really helps. Then he's another guy that's pretty versatile in where he lines up. I saw him line up an H-back, wide receiver, in line, in the backfield, and there was word that in the Shrine Bowl they wanted him to test him at fullback. He offers a lot of positional versatility, and that has shown to have willingness to do whatever coaches want him to do. Lastly, solid catch radius and very solid hands to go with it that makes him a very dangerous pass catcher. So the bad things about him, his blocking is more about absorbing contact rather than dishing out power. This is because he really isn't the strongest and is also a little undersized for an NFL tight end at only 6'2". He had to rely on turning his speed into power at times, and that's not likely going to work in the NFL. He's going to have to work on getting stronger and or perfect the already good parts of his blocking to be able to compete at the NFL level. Definitely to play in line at the least. He's going to really struggle at his size to play in line at the next level. Then his route running could use some work. There were times where his breaks were a little too rounded. He couldn't create the separation out of the break you would want. When playing against good coverage players, he struggled to deceive them with his routes too. So overall, he'd benefit from improving his route running. Another thing I noticed was he didn't have good vision at times, not always taking the best route when he has the speed to beat guys in certain directions. I don't think he trusts his own speed, which is interesting. Kind kind of building that on that as well, he looks ahead a lot. As a blocker, he would sometimes get to the next level too early while missing a more dangerous guy. And while I appreciate the effort, he has to work his way up to the next level instead of just heading there. It doesn't matter if you block the linebacker on the next level. If a blitzer that could have been picked up tackles the ball carrier behind you. Got to get the first. You got to take on the guy that's in front of you first, not the guy on the next level. Last thing is I saw him go down to arm tackles once or twice, and for a tight end, he has to be stronger than that, or at least get better contact balance to deal with that. So that could be a much bigger concern at the NFL level with stronger, bigger competition. So a lot of people have Granson going between rounds 5 and 7, and typically closer to 7 than 5 due to a proclaimed deep tight end class. But from what I've seen from this class so far, it really isn't that deep. It's not deeper than the average tight end class. At least I feel that way. I don't know if others. I mean, I do know. Others do think that this is a deep tight end class. This seems fairly reasonable to me. It feels like a normal class. So, based on what I see from this class so far, and thinking about Granson's blocking abilities, thinking that Granson's blocking abilities are being undervalued, or I view them better than other people have said, I think Granson's going to be a 4th-round pick. But if he falls like everyone else says he was, I think he'd be a steal anytime after the 4th round. I think that 5 to 7 seems a little bit rough for him. And I watched his highlights. I watched versus Memphis in 2020. I watched versus Tulsa in 2020. I watched versus East Carolina in 2020. And then I went back and watched versus Memphis in 2019. That would be my last prospect. Let's hear about your last prospect.
All right. Last but not least today, we're going to be talking about Noah Gray from Duke, a 6'4", 240-pound senior, another former All-Massachusetts player in high school, a 2-time All-Star selection by the Worcester Telegram, and a former 3-star prospect with 30 receptions for 600 yards and 8 touchdowns as a senior in high school. He played in 13 games as a freshman with just 5 catches for 2 touchdowns. As sophomore, 13 more games, 1 start, 20 catches for 234 yards and 1 touchdown. A second-team All-American as a junior for Walter Camp Football Foundation and a second-team All-ACC selection. In 12 games and 11 starts, he caught 51 passes for 392 yards and 3 touchdowns. And last year as a team captain, was a preseason All-ACC award winner and was a Mackey Award candidate for the best tight end in the nation. In 10 games, he caught 29 passes for 285 yards and 2 scores. Overall, in his college career, 105 catches, 8 touchdowns, 948 yards. Starting with his hands. By all accounts, Noah Gray is a sure-handed player. Only 3 drops in 4 seasons bodes well for him. And the only plays where he couldn't hang on to passes from what I saw came on poorly thrown passes or passes where he was being hit as the ball was getting there, so he had practically no chance. He can extend his arms to make catches away from his body and uses his athleticism to catch the ball and shield it quickly from defenders. This is a nice translatable trait, in my opinion, that'll help him when he gets to the NFL. He had an excellent snag on a touchdown against Virginia that I will be mentioning later. As far as his route tree and running goes, oh, by the way, I gave him a B+ for his hands. His route tree and running ability, I gave Noah Gray an A-. He runs a limited and mostly shallow route tree, a lot of curls, slants, outs, and ins with some fades and seam routes, but he is an excellent route runner. There aren't many tight ends I've seen at this level that can stick their foot in the ground like he does, like a true receiver, give head fakes, subtle moves that can help guys get open, and he runs routes like an actual receiver. I think this is his best attribute, and it helps him get open a ton. His touchdown against Virginia that I had mentioned before was an excellent play showcasing his ability to run routes involving a fantastic read on a linebacker and a head fake that got him to bite, which left him wide open in the end zone for an easy score. Gray's release would be what I'd consider average, maybe slightly above average. He spends a lot of time lined up in the slot and in the backfield, so he doesn't see press coverage a lot. He doesn't see press really much at all. So it'd be difficult to paint a clear picture here, but I haven't noticed any issues with his release so far. He may run into some problems getting bumped off the line once he gets to the NFL, but I gave him a B. Gray is a limited hit and miss type of guy when it comes to contested catches. He can make catches in traffic, but he has a shorter wingspan and has trouble hanging on to passes when he is hit sometimes. I've noticed that in difficult situations, he struggles to find the football and doesn't do a great job getting his body around to box out defenders. So I gave him a C+ for contested catching. His run after catch ability is just average. He's more dangerous, in my opinion, than a guy like Hunter Long, and he's a lot closer to the modern tight end with overall speed. He's a little faster, but not overall great in terms of elusiveness. He can do some damage, but he lacks wiggle and doesn't have enough power to keep plays alive, so I gave him a C. His functional athleticism, in my opinion, is good enough to make some plays. He's clearly below the level of the top and even the middle tier tight ends that have plus athleticism in this year's draft. Not a dynamic athlete, but he's replaceable in this regard. But he might pick up some athleticism by cutting some weight and becoming a true slot receiver. But by that same token, if he adds weight and bulks up to become a true blocker, he could lose some of that athleticism that he does have. So right now I'm keeping that at a C+. His blocking on the move in space, I thought it was okay. Gray showed that he can make blocks with his athleticism. He can get out and reach and use his determination and overall reach to get to where he needs to go. But he's lacking leg drive and play strength at the point of attack to make strong impact blocks. He looks more like a receiver making a block in space than a tight end in space. That might have worked at the college level, but going forward, it's not going to work unless if he gets stronger and gets coached up. His blocking as a fullback was okay. Nothing too amazing here. An NFL team is going to prefer a true fullback to him in this role. He's only going to be used there, I would imagine, in situations where a fullback is injured. So I gave him a B-. Gray's inline blocking next is rather unremarkable. Again, his play strength just isn't good enough right now to translate to the NFL level. Maybe that can change, but I'm skeptical. He has shown somewhat experienced in combo blocks to the second level, and he knows how to wall off defenders on the backside. So he's got some promise there. I gave him a C+. Gray's physicality is, in my opinion, an average amount of physicality in a tight end, probably slightly less. He's not overly bulky and strong. In fact, he's kind of small for a tight end. So he could stand to add more bulk, as I mentioned before, but even then it might not be enough to make him anything other than a fringe physical player as far as a tight end goes. So I gave him a C-. Gray's versatility, though, is his strong suit. One of his best attributes. He spent most of his time in the slot like a receiver as opposed to on the line of scrimmage, but he still had over 100 snaps in line and an additional 100 plus snaps in the backfield as a fullback in the pistol formation. Gray has a lot of receiving experience, inline experience as a blocker, and lead blocking and pass blocking experience. Though his pass blocking left a lot to be desired, he really has done it all at the college level, and I think that is worth something. So I gave him a B+ for that. Overall, Noah Gray is in the mold of a lot of good college tight ends that struggle to make it to the NFL right now. They're good and functional as short-range receivers that can block, line up in the slot or on the end of the line, or even as a fullback like Noah Gray did. The problem is that these guys don't have many outstanding traits if their athleticism is lacking. And a great example, in my opinion, is Thaddeus Moss. Really, the only difference between Moss and Noah Gray, in my opinion, is that Moss's last name is, well, Moss, and he had a couple of great plays in the college football playoffs last season. Meanwhile, Gray is nowhere near that with Duke. So I think besides that, those two players are quite comparable. And Moss spent the entire year on an NFL practice squad making no true impact. So I think Gray's going to find an NFL home in training camp, but he'll struggle to stick. I think he needs to decide whether he wants to be a receiver full-time in the slot or a full-time blocking tight end, because this halfway stuff is going to hurt him, I think, in the long run. I think he needs to figure out what he wants to do and what's going to go best for him. I do think there's some things to work with here, so I think that he's going to be worth a day 3 pick or will be a priority undrafted free agent. He's never going to be an outstanding player, but like I said, there's enough tools in the tool shed here to work with. I would imagine, again, a late day 3 pick here for Noah Gray. I saw his YouTube highlights, his games against Notre Dame and Virginia, and a game against Wake Forest in 2019. So now that we've talked about all 6 of our prospects, Austin, any final thoughts on those guys, and could you tell me how you would personally rank them for your opinion of how they'd fit with Pittsburgh?
Yeah, so I'll start. Let me go start with how the number 1. I was thinking of whether I wanted to do 3-2-1 or 1-2-3. I'm going to do 1-2-3. So the first prospect that I would like is Kylene Granson. Out of the prospects that I looked at, Granson was the best blocker, and thus I think he'd be a great addition to be a number 2 tight end with the Steelers. Don't get me wrong, though. Granson isn't just a Trayvon Wesco. He offers a lot in the receiving game as well. So combining all that with the projection of going round 5 or later from most sources, I like Granson the most. There's a lot of value there. Then after Granson, I have Kyle Pitts. I wanted Pitts to be number 1. I really did. Even today, after I'd already done my scouting of him, John Ledyard tweeted that he could be the second best prospect in this draft because he is so rare. I already mentioned that Daniel Jeremiah had him at 3. Unfortunately, I just can't get behind that. For them to say that I expected his block to be at a way higher level. I expected Pitts to be a complete prospect. Another, don't get me wrong, his blocking isn't awful. It's decent and serviceable, but not NFL ready. Regardless, what is rare is Pitt's combination of size and route running that you don't typically get from a tight end, which is why there are some talks that teams may actually try to move into wide receiver because they think he could be the next Calvin Johnson. Now, I honestly think it would be something to consider. If you look at him as a wide receiver, his blocking is NFL ready. He could handle any NFL quarterback with his size, his size, and his route running and hands are elite. This makes him number 2 for me. I think his versatility in the passing game makes him a rare prospect, but the blocking needed to be there for me to say that the Steelers should use their first-round pick on him because there's so many other positions to fill. I will say, though, if he's there at 24, it's going to be hard to pass up regardless. I just picture Pitts going before then and meaning that the Steelers would have to trade up for him. If he's there at 24, I'm not going to be mad at it. I think that it'd be a solid pick. It just may not make sense with the other positions they need to fill. That leaves Matt Bushman for number 3. Usually, Bushman is the kind of prospect that is all me. I love taking the gamble. I love, like, last year, one of my favorite prospects was Netane Muti, the offensive guard that went to Denver because he was so good, but he barely played any games. He was hurt, and this was just different. I just like my other prospects better. I wouldn't be mad at all if Bushman ended up slipping into late day 3 and the Steelers took the gamble with him. I think Bushman could definitely be good. Just the injury and the age combined with the acceleration concerned me, so I wouldn't be about taking him in the 4th round. But if he's there in the 5th through 7th, I would not be mad at it at all. So how do you rank your prospects?
First, I have Pat Freiermuth. Depending on free agency goes, I think it's possible tight end becomes the Steelers' top draft need. And in that case, I love Freiermuth for the Steelers, certainly in the 2nd round, and potentially with the Steelers' first pick if they trade down first. Injury concerns are going to keep me from saying he's a clear-cut round 1 guy, but he's pretty close to the whole package as far as the modern-day tight end is concerned. His biggest issue is that he's not as athletically diverse as Kyle Pitts, which is not really an issue in my mind because no one is. Taking him would likely solidify tight end for the next 5 to 10 years, in my opinion, given how physically imposing he is and what a matchup problem he poses to be in the NFL. So I like him a lot if you're looking for the future of the position. Next, I have Hunter Long, and I think he's a good replacement for Vance Mcdonnell as a number 2 tight end and maybe someday number 1B tight end. He's truly one of the few do-it-all tight ends similar to Freiermuth in the draft this year. They're hard to find, contrary to popular belief. I think it would be worth taking him maybe a little bit higher than his round 4 to 5 projection, and I might think about taking him in the mid to late 3rd round, depending on the positioning of the Steelers and who they've signed in free agency, what positions are really important to address. So I could see Hunter Long being available. I'd be happy with taking him so long as it's the mid to late third round or beyond. I think he has a lot of good traits. And finally, I have Noah Gray. He has some workable traits as well, but I think he's going to struggle to find a role early on, and he's not going to help the Steelers' tight end room right away. And even if he does play tight end because he can move to receiver, he's not going to make an impact right away. So unless the Steelers have ignored the position, I'd rather see the Steelers go elsewhere until maybe the 7th round, where if he's still around, I'd consider taking a flyer on him. So now that we've gotten the first overall position in terms of tight end out of the way, just in terms of the position tight end, do you enjoy kind of reviewing these types of prospects? Is there anything that stuck out this year compared to other years in your mind for this position?
I feel like this is the first year I actually looked at a really good tight end. I feel like every time I look at tight ends, I never get one where I think is really good. So Kyle Pitts was probably like the first one that it actually becomes something. I feel like not to say that Granson or Bushman can't, but I feel like all my past tight ends just have never amounted to much of anything.
Yeah, usually I'm the one that's looking at the top level tight ends, it feels.
Yeah, like Mark Andrews.
TJ Hawkinson, among others. But yeah, I'm always a big fan of the tight ends. I love being able to watch a guy that can go make plays in the passing game, but can also help with the running game. So that's one of my favorite things to do. Next, we're going to be doing off-the-ball linebackers, which is going to be interesting, kind of juxtaposed to the tight ends here. And I know that we haven't picked our guys yet, but we each had a fourth tight end that we were planning on looking at, which we ran out of time in terms of prep for today. But did you want to say anything about that fourth player just yet, or do you not know enough yet?
Sure. I mean, I might be looking at, wow, I can't remember, what's his name? Why can't I remember his name?
Oh, from Miami?
Yeah, from Miami.
Brevin Jordan, I believe is his name.
Yeah. I always do, like, an episode, like, the night before the draft of just some random prospects I'd been thinking about or heard something about that I didn't get to view at the time, and that's probably what's going to happen with him. I'll probably do then.
I gotcha. Kenny Yaboa is the guy that I'm going to be looking at if we get to that. He's interesting because his yards per reception is pretty high. Last year, in 8 games, he averaged almost 20 yards a catch. So he's kind of the typical tweener type player, I suppose. He's 6'4", 240, so similar to some of the players that we've looked at already. So if we have time, I'll look at him. So hopefully we will. Let's get to some NFL news before we wrap up the show here. The Houston Texans have released 2 potential targets for the Steelers in free agency, and running back Duke Johnson and center Nick Martin on Friday. What do you think about either of them in Pittsburgh next year?
I think Nick Martin would be a good addition. I'm not a big fan of Duke Johnson coming over because I feel like you could just get another running back in the draft. But Nick Martin's interesting because he started so many games. I know that the Texans' offensive line was one of the worst, but Nick Martin might be a good free agent to cover up for a rookie. You know what I'm saying? Like we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. I'd be a big fan of adding both, because if you sign Duke Johnson, you have no reason to carry Jalen Samuels on the roster anymore.
It's true. You make a fair point.
Not to be mean to him, but Johnson's a much better player doing what he does than a guy like Jalen Samuels is supposed to be. And Martin is definitely an interesting option, too. Maybe both could end up in Pittsburgh on cheap deals. Also, what in the world is going on with Russell Wilson? I mean, a couple weeks ago we heard he was upset about being hit so much, and now we're hearing that he's not demanding a trade, but he's also publicly released a list of 4 teams that he would accept a trade to, that being the Cowboys, Saints, Raiders, and Bears. Why would he say that, yet release this list? That seems like very odd behavior for a quiet player.
Yeah, I don't really know. It seems like an odd situation. I just hear that there's like a rift forming between him and Pete Carroll, where Pete Carroll, it's not just even about getting hit anymore. Apparently it's that he suggests something and Carroll isn't listening, and it's because Carroll doesn't have anyone to answer to, so it doesn't really affect him whether he listens or not. I don't know. Like, I don't. So I remember maybe it was a tweet, maybe it was an article from a while ago where it was about Tyler Lockett, and you'll see, like, there's this whole thing where there's talking about Tyler Lockett. He would say he'd bring plays, scheme up plays, not for himself but for other players, and he'd show this to the staff, and they would take these plays because they liked them. So it's like tough for me to believe that they don't listen to their quarterback and Russell Wilson. It's just all weird. A bunch of weird stuff coming out of Seattle.
Yeah, so I guess it kind of brings up the question of how much influence should a quarterback have on a team and an offense, because the Steelers have had, we've had our stuff going on with Ben Roethlisberger, and that's a question that gets brought up around here kind of for different reasons, where maybe he gets too much of a say, and who really knows what's going on there. But I think it's quite clear that the relationship there is not on the best of terms, but I don't really know what exactly is going on. Like, we could find out a couple weeks down the road that things are awful right now, and that would be kind of strange. And Doug Baldwin went off on Russell Wilson a number of weeks ago too. I don't know if you remember that. Like, he was saying like some not very nice things about Russell Wilson. So it's a very odd time to be a fan of that team, to be a fan of Russell Wilson. I'm glad that that's not something we're dealing with, because I would hate to have to trade a player like that.
Yeah, that would be awful. Losing a franchise quarterback that won you a Super Bowl. Got you to the Super Bowl a bunch of times. It's just, I don't know. That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one strange situation to be sure, so we'll keep our eyes on it. Another bit of news, it's not really NFL news, but Josh Gordon has teamed up with fellow NFL flameout Johnny Manziel on the FCF Zappers of the Fan-Controlled Football League. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they get reunited. I always like to, every few months, seeing Johnny Manziel's name pop up in some random league I've never heard of.
And this is the time. This time, Josh Gordon's name came up, and it wasn't because he was getting suspended or unsuspended.
I don't know. I don't know if Gordon's ever going to make it back. It just happened so quickly. Made it back, and then 2 days later, it's just like, nope, you're done. It's over for you. Get out of here.
And last but not least, a couple of sad deaths to report. First, on Sunday, it was confirmed that former NFL defensive tackle and Notre Dame star Louis Nix had died after going missing on Wednesday. Stephon Tuitt posted a heartfelt message on social media regarding the passing of his former running mate on the Fighting Irish defensive line. Personally, I just wanted to say I remembered watching him in the 2012 BCS National Championship game and a lot that season with Manti Te'o. That was a big, big man. He was a physically imposing man, and obviously gone way too soon. But I don't know if you have anything to say about it, but obviously not something you want to see.
Yeah, my condolences to his friends, family, former teammates, and so on and so forth. That's really all I have to say.
And then finally, a former NFL Pro Bowler and legendary sportscaster, Irv Cross, has died at the age of 81. He was a 9-year NFL player, spending time with the Eagles and Rams before returning to the Eagles as a coach temporarily, where he then went on to become the first African-American to work full-time as a sports analyst on national television, according to NFL.com. So a pioneer in terms of sports broadcasting, dead at age 81, so rest in peace to him. And that should wrap things up on today's podcast. Any further thoughts, last thoughts on the tight end position, Austin?
Not on tight ends, but looking forward, I'm pretty sure one of us is going to do Zaven Collins. I already actually watched some of his tape because I watched Granson versus Tulsa. And Zaven Collins is a guy that people have talked about being a potential first-round pick for the Steelers if they choose to get rid of Vince Williams.
All right, so we have that to look forward to. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about the show, please feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com, and visit our social media pages under the name Stronger Than Steel Podcast. You can find our episodes posted on SoundCloud and YouTube. Until next time, Austin, thank you for joining me today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and feel free to tune in next time. But until then, have a great day. Good night, everybody. Austin, thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.